Well, let's bring in our Monday political panel now, and Labor MP for the seat of Canberra, Alicia joins us, as well as South Australian Liberal MP James Stephens. Welcome to both of you. Alicia, I want to start with you first, just on a slightly unrelated matter to climate and industrial relations, which we'll get to. The bill that you sponsored in the lower house, the Territory Rights Bill, has made its way to the upper house. Talk us through where we are, because you were actually in the chamber this morning as it was introduced there.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So it was wonderful to be there in the chamber for that, in the Senate chamber for that moment this morning, and hear Senator Katie Gallagher speak to that. She's obviously been a really strong advocate for our constituents' equal democratic rights since she was Chief Minister of the ACT, and then also to hear Simon Birmingham and Senator Pocock speak, stayed in the chamber for their speeches, and others have also spoken in support this morning. So it's obviously a little bit nerve-wracking until that vote happens, but we're optimistic that it will pass, and that will mean that after 25 years, our constituents and those in the Northern Territory will finally have the same democratic rights as other Australians to debate and potentially legislate on the issue of voluntary assisted dying.
And we do need to pick up here, this is not a piece of legislation that is allowing voluntary assisted dying in the first instance. It's just giving the Territory Parliaments the ability to even debate the matter. Are you fearful that it could become, in the Senate, a proxy battle on the actual issue of voluntary assisted dying? Yeah,
so this is a conscience vote for all members of the Senate, and what myself and my other Territory colleagues have really been asking people to see this as what it is. It's about restoring the democratic rights of our constituents to have that debate, because voluntary assisted dying itself is a state and territory level matter, but the federal parliament has had the power to step in and prevent us having that debate. So this isn't about passing a law about voluntary assisted dying, it's about enabling us to have the debate. And apart from those people who do represent the ACT in the Northern Territory, every other senator's constituents have already been able to have that debate in their own jurisdictions. So we're just really asking people to put their support in us having the same rights as other Australians.
James Stephens, you voted in favour of this in the lower house. Why, first up? And secondly, what would your message be to your colleagues in the upper house about the rationale there?
Well, I supported it for the same reasons that Alicia's outlined. I mean, it's ultimately a matter of equality in our democratic system. The people of the Northern Territory and the ACT should not have abridged rights to those that live in the 6 states. I grew up for a few years in Canberra, so I'm a bit of an honorary Canberran, and I think that the people of Canberra, as much as the people of the Northern Territory, deserve the same rights in our democracy, and we'll let the Territory Assemblies make a decision on the issue through their democratic processes, but I don't think that there should be a difference between the rights of someone that lives in a territory and the rights of someone that lives in a state. And as far as your second point, I won't interfere in the decision-making of my good friends in the Senate, but I do think that the issue is encapsulated as Alicia's outlined. It's one of living in a democracy where there's no difference between the rights of a citizen in a territory versus a state.
So that's an area where you're both on the same page. Let's go to somewhere where you probably won't be on the same page, and that's the area of industrial relations. We've heard from senior members of the coalition that this idea about multi-employer bargaining is so off-kilter that there is no circumstances where they would even consider allowing it through. Why is there such a fierce opposition to this idea, James Stephens?
Well, we support enterprise-level negotiations, and we think that it's appropriate for employees and management in a particular business to come together and see if they can strike an enterprise bargaining agreement at the enterprise level, which works for the employees and with management of the company. Obviously, if you say, hey, a whole industry is going to have the same position of negotiation, no matter what the different eccentricities of a company might be, that's going to lead to poor outcomes. We don't want to see the industrial action that we saw back in the post-Second World War era, right up through the 70s, until, frankly, Paul Keating came along and introduced enterprise bargaining, which we are very happy with that system. We think it's led to really good outcomes, particularly around growing wages for employees, and that's a system that can be enhanced by adjusting some of the retrograde steps that the Gillard government put in place, particularly the boot test becoming more flexible. We see that as a pathway to growing wages for workers. People like Paul Keating and Bill Kelty are out today saying exactly the same thing, but of course the unions are back in charge under this Albanese government, and they of course are exacting their pound of flesh from this government very early on within the first 100 days.
There has obviously been this commitment from the government also to look at the boot, the better off overall test, to drop the parliamentary colloquialism, I guess, there that we often refer to it as. But on this issue of multi-enterprise bargaining, isn't there an argument to be made that workers in smaller companies who don't necessarily have that same sort of negotiating heft should be able to band together and try to fight for a better deal?
Well, they can do that at the enterprise level. I don't think there's an issue whatsoever with maintaining it at the enterprise level. Obviously, we've got the award structure in place as a safety net for employees, but if they can come together with their employer, with their management, and say, look, specific to the issue around our business and the way we operate, we'd like to negotiate to get off the award system and instead have a structure where we might get higher rates of pay in exchange for higher gains of productivity. That should happen at the enterprise level, at the business level. And if you treat businesses in a particular industry as all being the same, we think that'll lead to worse outcomes. And that, I think, is exactly the reason that we saw the reforms of the Keating era in the early 90s moving in that direction.
Well, Alicia Payne, I'm sure you've got a countering view to that. What do you think is the overarching benefit, I guess, of taking this new approach?
Well, I think, as you say, Matt, it's about people who are in those smaller, working for those smaller businesses or smaller, who don't have necessarily the same heft as people in a larger organisation coming together. You know, the Albanese Labor government is one that wants to get wages moving, and I think most people would agree with the rising costs of living that this is a really important issue. And this is about modernising our workplace relations laws so that they work better for both employees and employers. And what we saw from the Jobs Summit, and I was really pleased to have the opportunity to attend that, is that we are a government that's about discussion, about bringing people together, and that's what we were doing, bringing together representatives of employees and employers, and both have agreed that we need a new approach. So we're going to continue those discussions about improving this area of those laws.
There was clearly a fair bit of goodwill, or at least cooperation, at the Jobs and Skills Summit. It is often rare to see unions and business groups in the same room together, but on this issue of multi-employer bargaining, you had people like Ines Willocks from the AI Group, or Australian Industry Group. You had the Chamber of Commerce and Industry saying that this would be a drastic rewriting of industrial relations framework, that it could crush small businesses. And you've got COSBOA, the Council of Small Business, saying, look, cautious support, but it shouldn't be a compulsory sort of model. How difficult is it going to be for your colleagues to strike that balance when there are all those competing demands?
Well, I think that's, you know, the difference between, one of the differences between us and the opposition is that they've decided they're opposed to this when the actual people affected, such as, you know, COSBOA and the groups that they advocate for, they are open to having a discussion about making it work and, you know, offering some support towards that. And that's what we want to do. We want to keep talking and come up with a solution that works for both business and employees.
I do want to touch on one other issue, because we are quickly running out of time, and that is the climate bill, the government's climate bill, which is currently before the Senate. Obviously, again, not your natural habitat, James Stephens, but all of the activity, all of the attention is on the Greens, it's on the independents such as David Pocock. No one's even talking about the coalition when it comes to this climate debate. Are you at risk of being completely left behind as a result of this?
Well, no, this debate will move on very quickly once this legislation passes, and it will. I think the Greens have indicated, and David Pocock have indicated, they're going to support this legislation. So the real important part of the debate will be after this bill passes, which has actually got no concrete measures in it whatsoever, and we see whether or not Labor will achieve the commitments that they've said they would make, particularly the 43% by 2030. I think the debate about this bill is irrelevant to that, and it'll be very interesting to see, as certain measures are put in place by Labor, whether or not they can achieve the reductions that they say they can by 2030.
David Pocock is arguing, Alicia Payne, for greater integrity provisions to be put in here, greater accountability measures to ensure that a government of the day, whatever political stripe it may be, are actually held to this promise. It doesn't seem like your colleagues are open to even considering that. Is that just simply, how do you sell that message to the public then?
Yeah, well, my understanding is our government have been very open to discussions with the crossbench and anyone on these bills, and I'm incredibly proud that this is one of the first most urgent things that we did as a government was to pass these laws enshrining in legislation our commitment to our targets that will take us to 82% renewables by 2030.
But particularly on why you're sort of avoiding agreeing with someone like Senator Pocock on making it more accountable, making it more transparent.
Well, the legislation does require the Minister to update the Parliament annually on the progress, and it does, you know, it also, we have made those commitments to internationally as well. I think there is a high level of accountability, and that is inherent in the legislation that we've put forward. But my understanding is that we are discussing those matters with the crossbench.
Well, we'll see how those discussions play out. Alicia Payne, James Stephens, we do have to release you for question time. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Matt.